Okay, Amit, I'm going to show 12 reasons why manufacturing in India does not work today. Okay, so just for clarity, gentle reader, earlier I gave you 8 ways in which manufacturing is different from services. So we need to appreciate that deep inside our head. Now we're going to go after what holds manufacturing in India back. Okay, reason 1 is labor law. So in your Seen and the Unseen episode, Sudhir and Naren make some very interesting points. They say at least in a good state like Maharashtra, the government has understood that wildcat trade unions and union bazi is really destructive for the economic growth of the state. So generally the government has started tamping down its support for unions and its willingness to go along with some of the provisions of Indian labor law. While they are right on that about Maharashtra, I will point out that there are many states in India that are not called Maharashtra, where all those concerns about labor unions are alive and well. And so the empowerment of trade unions by the Indian state, which by the way is called a market failure, called market power. When a bunch of workers come together, it's called market power and it's a market failure. And the job of the state should be to run interference against market failure, not to enable or enshrine it. The second part of the problem is minimum wage. I want to hold you a great example, which is like a North Korea, South Korea comparison. Okay, so you have a communist country called West Bengal, where the minimum wage is 13,000 rupees, and you have a capitalist country called East Bengal, where I think the minimum wage is 8,000 rupees. Okay, and who do you think got an amazingly successful garment export industry? The answer is East Bengal. Okay, and what sense does that make? Like, why is the state better off by putting up a high minimum wage? Okay, the state should get out of the way. Then let people choose. Nobody is conscripting the workers. It's voluntary actions of workers that make them choose to work. Why should the state come into it saying 13,000 should be a minimum wage? And in fact, we get mass poverty in India because millions of people don't get those jobs and only a few capital intensive factories arise. The high minimum wage in India means the only way to make low-tech problems like garmenting work in India is to amp up their technological complexity. You can't do it by hand because at that minimum wage, you're not viable on a global scale. So you get capital intensive garment manufacturing in India. What sense does that make? And the Indian financial system doesn't work too well. So capital is also quite expensive in India. Okay, and then you described Industrial Disputes Act and problems of closing factories, problems of sacking workers and all that. So all this is problem 1, labor. The Indian state has created an environment that is not conducive for manufacturing.
And though we've spoken about it before, if someone hasn't seen that episode, they might say minimum wage is a good thing. You're guaranteeing people 13,000 bucks. What's wrong with that? And to that, I would say 2 things. You're not guaranteeing people 13,000 bucks. As is Milton Friedman explained in this video you see on the screen, and we'll have a link in the show notes. What simply happened is that you outlawed everyone whose labor is worth less than 13,000. It means they're out of a job. So it's not that if you were earning 8,000 and you have a minimum wage law that says 13,000, it's not that you suddenly earn 13,000. It's that you earn 0, a big fat 0. And also, you might say 8,000 is not a living wage, right? But the point is, someone who's taken a job worth 8,000, there are 2 things to note. Number 1, he's taken the best option available to him. It is literally better than every other option. Every other option is worse. So how can you be condescending and say he should not be allowed to take that? And the other is that if there is a competitive marketplace, and it's a state's job to ensure that is the case by staying out of the way and enabling that and having rule of law, in a competitive marketplace, that 8,000 is the max that any company can pay. Otherwise, companies are also competing for labor. Some other company would then offer him more if there was an advantage in doing so. So what you really do is, with a minimum wage, you put the poorest people out of a job, which is just criminal and a classic example of how such laws hurt the people they're supposed to help.
One more way to see this is that imagine a voluntary transaction between consenting adults. There's a firm, there's a worker, and they're willing to work at 8,000, they're willing to work at 4,000. But no, now the state comes along, uses its monopoly of violence and says, I will not allow this to happen. And suddenly those two people are frustrated because they had wanted to do something together, but the government has interfered with that. It really is not a good idea.
So what's your next point, Ajay?
The next problem is infrastructure. Manufacturing involves moving goods around, and for many locations in India, in many parts of India, infrastructure remains a problem. Now, you and I did an episode of Everything is Everything titled Where Has All the Infrastructure Gone, where we remark that giant gains have been obtained in Indian infrastructure and there was no commensurate improvement either in FDI into India or in manufacturing exports from India or in manufacturing employment. So I'm not yet ready to say that this is a binding constraint today. I think the other 11 problems are more of a binding constraint. Currently, the infrastructure is a bit ahead and we should not obsess that much on more infrastructure. Okay, the third story is around the land market. To some extent, I believe India is in the midst of a China-style land market bubble where land values are just nuts. Land values are way beyond rental yields. Agricultural land prices are way beyond the plausible annual profit from doing agriculture. So land prices are nuts. Now, if you are a manufacturing company, what you want is a chunk of land and you want road connectivity, you need electricity, you need water, you need safety. Okay, and that's a difficult package to put together. Most places in India would not be able to supply all these. Further, it actually doesn't end at the problem of just the land, because then you need the workers. So meaningfully, you need large factories. Okay, you get economies of scale. You will play on a global scale by the time a factory is well beyond 2000 workers. Anything below 2000 workers is really dinky on a global scale. It's non-trivial getting 2000 workers to show up every morning at one particular place. Then you need to think of the populations where all those people are living. For all your romantic notions of a village of 150 households is around 750 persons, out of which around 300 are available to work, out of which at most 100 would go to one particular factory. So if you have a factory near one village, you're getting 100, 200, 300 people from there. You're nowhere near 5,000, 10,000 workers from 5-10 surrounding villages. So this really needs an urban planning approach. You need urban density of the households who can then become workers in factories. So you should get out of the romantic idea that there will be factories near villages. Factories will always be near cities. And then you need urban density. You need the urban planning. Similarly, on the problem of shortage of land, yes, of course, you should be building high. Okay, so you need to increase the FSI so that factories are not limited to only being ground floor affairs. They should go up. There should be multiple floors of a factory. But then the moment you do that, you need the commensurate urban planning where there are roads. So for example, if you have a factory going up 5 floors, it requires 5x the logistics. It requires 5x the workers. Then you need the commensurate road and rail and other kinds of connectivity. Otherwise, once again, the whole thing breaks down. So what is needed is urban planning. Factories should be seen as an integral part of urban planning. So, Bimal Patel did this great talk at the Emerging Markets Conference where he talked about his single unifying theme around urban planning, that the job of urban planning is to make sure like 40% of the land goes into streets and parks and a mechanism through which some of that money comes back into the urban infrastructure. Okay, so industrial capabilities and manufacturing related land should be seen as integral to urban planning, not as Tata Steel going and buying some land at the back of beyond and then they are supposed to do all the urban development. That's not a reasonable description anymore. Okay, and then number 4, I come to the problem of labor. I already talked about one issue, that you want 2,000, 20,000, 100,000 workers in a factory. Where are they located? Where are they going to live? But then think not just entry level 8,000 rupees a month, 10,000 rupees a month blue collar labor. Think of the entire management tree. A factory is a very complex organization. It requires employees at many, many levels. Where are they going to live? Once again, you have to think urban. You can't have a remote factory far away because then all the senior people will not be there. A factory has to be viewed as part of a city. And then in that context of the city, we will be able to get all the skill levels of the people who will work for a factory. And you just pause for one moment and you will see how this is an integrally urban problem. Imagine I'm going to put up a factory with 20,000 workers and we have, 10,000 machines. So we've got an average of 4 humans per machine on the shop floor. Okay, 10,000 machines are on the shop floor. Well, 10,000 machines will have a repairs and maintenance schedule. They will have all kinds of care and feeding. There will be an operating system upgrade that has to be done on each of the machines. There will be many, many vendors and service providers who will do all that. Where will their employees sit? Okay, their employees need offices, their employees need homes, their kids need schools. Okay, these are high skilled people who are going to flash a prom on a CNC lathe. Okay, it doesn't come easily. So we should completely get out of this idea that a factory is going to sit somewhere in a village. Factories should be seen as deeply connected into the urban planning process, so that large density of a workforce going from low end all the way to high end and an array of associated service providers are all available in that urban semi-urban environment, who can then feed into these big complex factories. I know today in India people are trying the Chinese dormitory model, where the factory will take responsibility for building hostels. Okay, I think that's deeply dissatisfying, and what we need is for Bimal Patel and Bajor Mehta and Suyash Rai to dream how to bring manufacturing into urban planning. Number 5, electricity. Okay, we already talked about the problem of electricity, the intermittency and the price point of electricity, and the inability of an exporter to demand and get 100% renewables, certifiable, auditable renewables. This is just an abysmal mess. Akshay Jaitley and I have been part of this field for many years. We are dreamers around a market-based electricity sector. We did a seen and the unseen episode with you about our coconut paper. You and I did an episode of Everything is Everything on the future of electricity.
One of our best episodes. Watch it.
And this is the stuff that needs to be done to make manufacturing work. Okay, number 6 is a very easy idea: trade barriers. Okay, it should be crystal clear to every Indian that when you put any friction at the border, then imported goods in India become more expensive. So the manufacturing company that is going to buy those imported goods ends up being less competitive.